Okay, let's jump in, I guess. So, turn that up a little bit. There we go. Okay, so on the wrong lights. On the agenda today, we're going to keep going talking about unpaid work. Oop, that's maybe a little too dark. All right. And then we're going to jump into talking about kind of organizing and managing work. So yeah, we're getting down to it. We don't have a ton of lectures left. So we'll finish off this material and move on. I'm still working on marking the exams. Hopefully should be through it pretty soon. Early next week is sort of my goal on it. So, right. Last time, what were we talking about? We're talking about some of the ways that family, like work-life balance, kind of comes into conflict with, work and family come into conflict, right? And what its effects on people is, right? We talked about, less job satisfaction, higher stress, lower rates of commitment, right? So if your job and family are stressing you out together, you're less likely to stick around in a job. And you're more likely to call in sick or miss work, just as sometimes a way of getting back at your boss or the company you work for. So we see all of this. Okay. Now, what would be possible scenarios where this would be, kind of mitigated? Things like flexible work hours and schedules, do help. But one of the things, obviously, this is difficult for a lot of employers. Any employer that kind of has any kind of reliance on everybody else is at work at the same time. You have to work with other companies. Flexible schedules can be really difficult. It works okay for some kind of laptop class workers, but others not so much. Okay, personal and family related leaves. This is obviously getting better. We've seen more companies implement family leave policies, not just maternity and parental leaves, but leaves to take care of kids and sick relatives, right? Take mom or dad to appointments and this kind of thing. But it has been really slow in terms, whoops, that is not what I meant to do. Has been really slow in terms of its implementation, right? Not all companies, it's not universal, and it's certainly not mandated legally. So it's not something that companies have to do. It's something that good employers tend to do. The ability to refuse overtime. Again, this is something that's getting better, but still, there's a lot of companies where they can make you work mandatory overtime as part of your kind of contract. And supportive managers. Sometimes you get them, sometimes you don't. It really depends, and a lot of times, managers get sort of super focused on the job and not so much on the people. So most jobs still remain pretty inflexible, right? It's really, high status, good paying jobs where people command a lot of respect and they themselves have a lot of leverage with their employers, where you tend to get these things. Most work is still sort of your typical, 9 to 5 or 8 till 4:30 kind of job. Okay, so the Conference Board of Canada, right, predicted, now back in the early 2000s, that basically employers would have to change their approach to work-life balance, especially as the millennials came into the workforce, right, because it was something that they said they valued. But just on a kind of basic level, stressed, tired, and angry workers are, in fact, less productive than workers who make more money, workers who are well rested, not angry, right, who are happy, right? you tend to get drops in productivity. And we'll talk about how some of this works when we talk about management. Tend to get people purposely sort of finding workarounds to doing work in legitimate ways. Sometimes it's referred to as gold bricking, in order to just do less at work. They find every little workaround, and it ends up being a problem. We'll talk about why other people tend to imitate this as well. And yeah, most workers still can't set their own hours, right, or split hours, kind of figure things out, right? There's still sort of generally an expectation that you're going to show up at a certain time and work until a certain time. That's still the way we think about work. And I mean, a lot of that is still going back to sort of the factory system, right? The factory system had set hours, and so our history of kind of how we work is still set along these rationalistic, bureaucratic kind of lines. Most workers can't control where they work, right? And we had a little bit of a change during COVID, where work from home became more common, and post-COVID, that remained the case, but now we're kind of peeling things back a lot. And this makes for all sorts of work-family kind of weird dynamics, right? Certainly, I don't work in a career, obviously, where I can choose where I work a lot of the time, right? I work in this classroom and chatting with y'all and other classrooms like it. It would make it a lot easier, say, I wouldn't have to pay for childcare next year for my youngest kid if I could work from home and be there to meet the bus when he got home, because, I could be there and have him have a snack and watch TV while I finish my workday. That would be nice. But yeah, for most people, these kinds of flexible arrangements just don't exist. Okay. And yeah, even, that said, even for those with flexible schemes, it doesn't always reduce stress. Family and work are always going to be hard to balance. And I think, in large part, this is why we see people having smaller families, because, the stress of having a lot of kids or a big family is quite difficult, especially as these generations, like millennials and Gen Z, are facing that caregiver crunch that we talked about, right? Where they're kind of stuck between caring for older parents and young children at the same time. And yeah, I mean, even if you have the most accommodating employer in the world, it's really unlikely that they can give you the exact accommodation that you need, right? Like, there are dynamics to workplaces and jobs that aren't always that flexible, right? It's like you want to work from home, but you're a plumber, right? That's obviously not going to work. And yeah, some things, like flex time plans can reduce time crunch, but they create other problems, right? So, if you have let's say a flex time where you start, let's say you work after you drop your kids off at school, you work from, I don't know, let's say you get home at 9 after dropping your kids off at school, and you work until they get home at 3:30, and then you finish the rest of your day, after they go to bed, I don't know, optimistically 8, 9 o'clock, right? That time working from, after 8 o'clock in the evening, you're probably really tired. And so it creates sort of problems that way. Tends not to be as available in a lot of female-dominated professions, also, especially teaching and nursing. Okay, compressed work weeks. I've had a few friends try these actually, right? Where basically you worked your 40 hours, but you worked 4 days a week. And I can confirm these were a nightmare, because those 4 10-hour days, for a couple of things, like productivity really dropped actually, because the last 3 hours of every day was just this fall off in productivity because concentration wasn't there. And it made a lot of problems in terms of evenings a lot more difficult, right? Where basically you were getting home really, really late from work for those 4 days. And so activities for kids were really difficult. Job sharing, obviously a good solution, right? If you split your job with another person, but because you're only doing, say, half a job or 3/4 of a job, tends to lead to lower pay at the same time. Okay, so is this my, trying to remember if this is my last slide. Oh, I got one more after this. Okay, so yeah, I mean, one of the things that seems to be a big problem here, it's maybe a question of social priorities, right? we've really prioritized careers, right? People having successful careers. And we reward them with a lot of things, but one of the big ones we reward them with is status, right? So people are this is a basic kind of anthropology, sociology principle. People are super status conscious and status aware. And basically, they will go to great lengths to be of high status. So, we've given careers and working hard and career success a really, really high status. We've given, having kids a relatively low status, so it's relatively low priority. So, what we're seeing in a lot of ways is people prioritizing career over family, to a really high extent, in ways that are potentially problematic, right? Sacrificing your family life and kids and all of that stuff in order to have a successful career. This has, amongst other things, we see people getting married later and having kids a lot later, meaning, and most people wait until they're married to have kids. And so people are having fewer children than in the past. Our total fertility in Canada is really low. There was a Cardis, a study by Cardis that basically said that about half of women ended in Canada, this was in Canada, were ending their sort of reproductive lives with fewer children than they wanted, right? With fewer kids than they wanted. And most of them wanted 2, right? And so, they ended up having 1 to 0 children, right? Or 0 to 1 kid. So about half of Canadian women were saying, and the big thing that stopped them from having children was work, right? It was career. Their career got in the way of them having kids. So making people potentially less happy or having life outcomes in terms of how many children they have that are lower than what they otherwise would have wanted, right? And Canada has a really low birth rate. We're at 1.26 children per woman today, and replacement fertility is 2.1. So, without immigration, Canada's population would shrink tremendously. And I know I've said that already. Okay. One of the kind of solutions to this has been to outsource, aspects of domestic life and care. So people who talk about kind of sociology of family often talk about a care deficit, right? And a growing market for household and caring services, right? So a very high value for the domestic market in childcare, right? The cost has gone down in some ways because, the federal government under Justin Trudeau brought in this subsidized childcare policy that's supposed to reduce eventually the cost of childcare to $10 a day. It's not quite there yet. I think Alberta's now almost at the $15 a day boundary. But, this is actually in some cases weirdly reduced the number of spaces because there was a lot of basically unregistered childcare spaces that existed, like unlicensed day homes. And these have become more problematic, simply as, they can't compete with the places offering $15 a day daycare. And because, you can only get that price if you're registered to get that subsidy, right? It's quite an involved process. So what we've actually seen is a reduction in the number of childcare spaces, and it's more complicated to get childcare spaces, right? You have to navigate this very Byzantine bureaucracy sometimes to get into those spaces. Okay. So, childcare, the value of the childcare industry in Canada was estimated at $3.5 billion in the early 2000s, and this has clearly gone up. And increasingly, we're seeing other things, right? A wide variety of family and household work purchased in neighborhoods. Like I notice, like if I go on Amazon and I buy like a bed frame, Amazon now has an option where I can also have someone come to my house and assemble the bed frame for me, which seems like a little bit much. Mind you, I did swear a lot when I was assembling my last bed because the screws were cheap and they kept stripping out. That was not necessarily because it was hard. Maybe I should have rented someone to come do it for me. It probably would have been better. But we see, a lot of other stuff like people do it, more yard work, more handyman services, and increasingly a lot of things like, cleaning services really proliferating, right? There used to be like just a few professionalized cleaning services. Now there's a lot. You can pay someone, you can go find this, people to plan your kids' birthday parties, people to drive your parents around, right? There's a driving Miss Daisy or, what is it? There's one that's right by my house. They drive this pink car and it's something like nurse something. Anyway, mobile nurse or something like that, a kind of nursing service to ferry your parents along to appointments. Anyway, nurse next door. That's what it was. It's nurse next door. Anyway, so we're seeing a lot of things that people were doing, right, as we feel this pinch, right, in childcare, in elder care, all of the domestic responsibilities being crowded out by increasingly demanding workplaces. People are paying more and more for other people to come in and do these kinds of services. Now, of course, the problem with that is it always costs, right? So if you're, working your career to get, paid, but you're ending up paying a lot of that money out for childcare, for, handyman services, someone to take your parents, it eats through, and it's part of this kind of declining standard of living that we see in Canada sometimes. Okay, I doubt there's any questions, but I will quickly go back to there's a question slide right there. Okay, all right, that was quick. I'm gonna discard my doodles and open up the next presentation, which was this one. Okay. Okay, give me half a sec to just double check one thing. Sometimes, nope, looks like the live stream of the course is still working perfectly. Awesome. Okay. So we're going to talk about organizing and managing work a little bit. And this leads into, I think, this unit is kind of classical theories. Once we get to the next unit after this, it's one of my favorite ones. The next unit after this is new management theories, and they're really fun. Those ones are fun. Those are coming up next. These are kind of more classic ones. Okay.
Okay, here's a little video that illustrates
hang on. I apparently left embedded audio in here. Allow me to get rid of that. Always something. Recording. Clear. Timings. Clear narrations. There we go. Okay. There we go. All fixed. Oops. I have lost my way here. I just have to fix the live stream. My apologies. Okay, hang on a sec. Oops, that resized. Sometimes I think my life would be easier without the live stream. There we go. Okay. Okay, so bureaucracy. Oh my gosh. Keep forgetting. The other thing is I have to change the audio. Short, oh, that one should be fine. Okay, well, we'll see.
Espera un momento.
Quería darme de alta en autónomos.
Ventanilla de información, modelo TA1. Lo cumplimenta en esa mesa y después...
Me he traído relleno.
No ha rellenado esa casilla. Vaya a las mesas de la entrada y...
He traído 2 copias, escritas y revisadas.
Le falta el impreso de Hacienda. Y la fotocopia. Muy bien, Rubita. Tú lo has querido. Fotocopia del DNI. Número de cuenta. Fotocopia de la tarjeta de la Seguridad Social. Fotocopia de los impresos de Hacienda. Doble fotocopia del modelo 036, numerado y grapado.
Okay, so bureaucracy, right? Bureaucracy literally means rule of the desk, right, or the office, from the French le bureau, right? And this was really the dominant organizational form in the 19th and 20th centuries. And obviously, bureaucracy is still with us because you need to organize how processes work, and what you get is bureaucracy. So one of our kind of really important early sociologists that we talked about earlier in the course was Max Weber. And he thought that basically bureaucracies and large complex bureaucracies were super important for large capitalist economies because they, at a certain point, they end up being so complicated that you need specialized personnel, specialized individuals to run the whole operation, right? You need someone to coordinate all the parts of, say, a manufacturing process. And you needed kind of calculable rules, right? You didn't want sort of people flying off the handle, creating new rules on the fly, right? People wanted sort of calculable rules, things that never changed, to govern workplaces, right? To govern specialized tasks in factories or offices. And the benefits of bureaucracy were pretty obvious, say, to early sociologists, right? There were things like clarity, reliability, efficiency. I guess the efficiency achieved through the fixed division of labor. We could question that, because we've now lived through a lot more bureaucracy. Hierarchical supervision, this one, impersonal relations, where it doesn't matter who the bureaucrat is, they do their job impersonally, and details rules and regulations. Weber in particular thought that it was an improvement over older tradition-bound systems, like that were mostly systems that were hereditary. These systems, he thought, were inherently kind of problematic because they were poorly structured and inefficient. Sometimes you promoted people not based on merit, but because, you know, he was the son of the second Earl of Yorkshire, and that's why he got that particular job. Okay. Now, obviously, the problems with bureaucracy are sort of well understood. Bureaucracies are often, you know, and kind of what's shown in that video clip is sometimes they are complicated and difficult to manage, right? They have these very strange internal rules that are often quite, you know, I use the word Byzantine. The Byzantine Empire was known for its complex bureaucracy as well, and its rules were often hard to understand, right? So sometimes they are overly complicated and the rules can be hard to understand. Bureaucracies are often resistant to change, right? And frequently unable to cope with new things coming along. They're, you know, and even big companies, you know, think of a corporation like Microsoft, especially Microsoft in the 2000s and 2010s. Microsoft got caught flat-footed on a lot of big transitions because it had this really entrenched bureaucratic system of decision-making, right, where things had to go up the ladder. So Microsoft really missed things like the smartphone transition, right? And it had these really, you know, it was very resistant to change, resistant to like the idea that the desktop computer wouldn't be the center of people's computing lives. And then, you know, very famously, the people at the top had very strange ideas about how to create a mobile platform, and they created the Frankenstein's monster that was Windows 8. That was a total disaster for the company. And it was because of this kind of bureaucratic system where, you know, it was very slow to change and react to things happening, right? Okay, so sometimes for bureaucrats, right, rules become an end in and of themselves. Like, so why are the thing, you know, why do we do the things the way we do? Well, because those are the rules, right? And bureaucracies follow the rules, especially where you get, whoops, I think I have the timing still in there. I will fix that later. Sometimes you get what's called kind of a bureaucratic mindset, right? Where rules are rules and innovation is discouraged because people start to have lived inside the bureaucracy for so long that they forget that there's anything outside of the bureaucracy, right? And they forget why the rules are there or that there should be some kind of human space. They just follow the rules for the rules' sake. And yeah, we've got these long chains of command, slow response times, right? This is where, you know, again, in the kind of tech sector, you often get this distinction made between kind of older tech firms and startups, where the startups will have these really short management chains, right? It's probably just the founders that are there making the decisions, so they can react really quickly. And once you get these big, complicated tech firms, you know, like Microsoft, like Google, like Apple, they can be really slow to respond to things. Simply because, you know, to get the message up to someone who can make a decision takes a long line of people going up the chain of command. Okay, and yeah, empire building and kind of silo thinking by managers and employees. Sometimes people build little kingdoms inside of corporations, right? Within bureaucracies or within like government, where they're the top manager of this particular department. So it's almost like they're the king of that place. So they build their little empire within it, right? Oh, again, I don't want to beat on Microsoft because I have a soft spot for the company in lots of ways. But Microsoft, if you go back to the 2000s, people had these organizational charts of Microsoft, where it was literally just like different parts of Microsoft, and there were just hands coming out of it, and they were all pointing guns at each other, right? Because they were all protecting their little, you know, Windows was over here being protected, cloud, like Azure was over there, and it was fighting for dominance in the company. And then I forget the other divisions of Microsoft. They've changed so much over the years, but they were all kind of fighting and especially trying to protect their little part of the company because that's the kingdom they were in. And if you look at this, right, like any company that has a lot of divisions like this, they've had, you know, sometimes charismatic managers or people that run certain parts that treat it almost like their little world, and they try to do almost what they want. I remember Panos Panay, who I think he's at Amazon now. He was at Microsoft for years, and he was the one kind of in charge of the Surface group, so making Surface laptops and other PCs. You know, he was almost like the king of that part, and you know, every time they announced a new product, he got to like come out on stage like he was, you know, some kind of princeling emperor to announce the new devices. And that's the kind of thing that can happen in really bureaucratized workplaces. Okay, I'm gonna make this play.
Hello.
Hello, Muriel. Another day in paradise.
She actually means that. Please don't be offended.
Great. What do you want?
To apply for a block party permit, here is Form 1290.
Oh, wait, you trying to get a permit for this Friday? You would need...
1290B expedited request, and a 1021J adjustment waiver, and a sweet P28P supplemental.
Right. There's just one problem.
What? No. I did absolutely everything.
The 1021J has to be submitted with an approved 1290.
But I'm submitting the 1021J to get the 1290 approved. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I guess it doesn't.
Okay. This is just a puzzle, and I can figure it out. To get an approved 1290, I need an approved 1021J, which I can't get without an approved 1290, which I can't get without an approved 1021J, which I can't get without an approved 1290, which I can't get without an approved 1021J, which I can't get without an approved 1290, which I can't get without an approved 1021J, which I can't get without.
She's in a loop. You broke her brain. I'm gonna take her out of here.
1021J, which I can't get without an approved 1290, which I can't get without.
Okay, right. So obviously from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, this is bureaucratic thinking at its finest, right? And we see, what we would call a bureaucratic personality, right? You've got this person behind the desk who clearly does not really want to help, and they are kind of stuck on the rules, right? You need this form to get that one, even if the process doesn't actually make sense in this case, and that's the joke of the episode, right? The forms were actually made by a schizophrenic person who was confused about what progression the form should be in. And so, she's like, yeah, I created half the forms for the city of New York and half of them don't even work. But the person behind the desk, won't bend and be like, okay, I'll give you the approval because clearly this doesn't make sense. Like, unless you get that approved form, you can't proceed with this. Okay. Bureaucracies too, too much paperwork, too many meetings, right? The joke with bureaucracies is often like this meeting could have been an email at the end of the day, right? We didn't need to actually sit down for an hour, but bureaucracies tend to have a lot of this, and they can be pretty cold, alienating places to work. Okay, and sometimes you get an excessive division of labor in bureaucracies, right? Where people are too specialized in one particular set of tasks. And that tends to create, what the frickle pickle? Okay. I'm going to, yes, that was my swear for the day. Okay, what is going on here? Something is happening. I will be right back. Okay. Record. Clear recordings on all slides. That should fix it. Okay. Apparently at some point I presented these as a recording and the timings remained inside. Okay. And that I broke this again. No. I'm sorry, people who aren't here. It just might be so broke. Oh no, I fixed it. Okay. I thought we were dead, but we're fixed. Okay. All right. Hopefully that doesn't happen again, because it's super fun when the slides just jump forward and I've done nothing. Okay. So Weber thought, obeying the rules in a bureaucracy. Why did people obey the rules? Because they believed the system was impartial or fair. That people basically, they thought that the rules were fair, they were created fairly, that the system itself was fair. But obviously, that is maybe a slightly idealized version of how management systems work. Okay, there we go. Oh, yeah, sorry, this is the Microsoft org chart. I had it on a different different slide, right, where everyone's pointing a gun at each other. That was the joke, right, from people who are observers of Microsoft, that everybody was basically pointing a gun at all the other departments, trying to keep, their own place kind of safe. Okay. So, when we talk about Weber's view, right, Weber was really focused on kind of the formal structures that exist within companies and organizations. But there are a lot of informal structures as well, right? So for example, right, there are personal relationships inside of bureaucracies. So I'll just give you like a very quick example from my own life, as I'm wont to do sometimes. because we've just gone through this this period where students are trying to get registered for their courses next year, and there's a very bureaucratic process that sociology has if you need help, right? You have to book a time with an advisor and all of this stuff. But I have a personal relationship with our lead undergrad advisor, right? We've been friends for a long time. And so like when students come to me and they're having trouble and they're worried about it, I just walk them over and I knock on Pam's door and I'm like, hey, Pam, could you help out Haley? And, even though she's supposed to make people go through this very, they have to book an official time and they have to come in and it's a 15-minute appointment. If I actually just bring them over, Pam will always see that student for me. Because we're friends, right? Because we have this kind of informal relationship where if I'm asking her for something, she's going to do it. So you always want to be friends with the administrators, by the way. So like always cultivate this relationship because inevitably the administrators can make your life much, much easier. So like if it costs you a couple of Starbucks, a month to just bring them a coffee and make them like you, it's well worth the investment over time. That's not pertinent to our topic. It's just some basic life advice. Sometimes the administrators can make your life hell, but if they like you, everything kind of works out. Okay, so there are also obviously times where employees might reinterpret, resist, or adapt to work structures and management directives, right? Sometimes people will purposely sort of misunderstand or maybe they don't purposely do it, they may do it accidentally. So there's all sorts of things that happen to these official work rules. Sometimes rules that were set a long time ago get kind of reassessed and changed, not formally, but people start treating them differently, right? So there's all sorts of ways that people sort of resist these structures or change them without kind of formal changes. Yeah, org charts represent a management level idea of how things should work, but workers often feel differently, right? Yeah, so I mean, you might, like I always say, like in sociology, we have a chair, we have two, associate chairs, and technically, like you're supposed to go to these people with any of your problems, but the actual people with the power are the advisors. So I never ever bother the chairs. I always go straight to the advisor, right? So, right, sometimes the official idea is everything should go up to the chair level and be talked about there, but I'll just talk to, like I wanted one of my classes boosted by 10 seats. I don't bother talking to the chair. I just talk to the advisors because they're the ones who can actually change it and we can get around some of those things that way. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess Roy talked about this in his 1962 work on informal work groups, right? That people create these informal practices to get around bureaucratic kind of systems. And they will create some informal work practices, either to resist kind of management edicts in terms of like gold bricking is a term for basically kind of slacking off on the job. Basically you kind of follow the formal rules of the job, but you do it in such a way as to kind of derail the whole process. Like you work as slow as possible is the typical gold brick thing, or take really long breaks. So especially on what Roy called stinker jobs, right? The worst jobs, the ones that were given by management to people sometimes as a punishment, they would purposely kind of follow the rules on a formal level, but informally sort of try to slow things down and gum up the works as much as possible to show their distaste. And yeah, you get a lot of, and you'll see this, unofficial or freewheeling managers who follow unofficial practices rather than the formal rules, right? People create unofficial practices, and it's always this kind of like, I don't know, I think the phrase of the kind of freewheeling manager is, shh, don't tell anyone, right? Well, we'll do it this way, but don't tell anyone, right? Because that's not how we're actually supposed to get things done. Just don't, you don't go telling everyone. And I say this, and I just told an entire class of people that I purposely go around the rules all the time to help particular students. So that's fun. Yeah. Oh, and of course, right, promotions, based on personal or social characteristics instead of merit, that does happen, right? People promoting people they like. Using company assets for personal gains, I would never, ever do that. Except I do it all the time. I stole this laptop from the university technically because it's my work assigned laptop and they set it up as a U of A laptop. but I couldn't install my own software, and they stuck me with Office 2016, which is not going to happen. So I basically went into the BIOS and I reformatted it to factory specs, and it was super easy. Even though I said to IST, I'm like, I know how to like go into the BIOS and break the UFE, not BIOS now. But I went into the UFE system and I was like, oh, I know exactly what to do. And they're like, well, we can't stop you, but you shouldn't do that. I'm like, okay. So now it's my laptop, and I peeled the little sticker that says property of U of A off of it, and it's mine now. So it will be mine. I might give it to one of my kids. I don't know. Who knows? I'm a bad person, and I'm good with it. How are we doing for time? Okay, 5 minutes. So bureaucracy and Fordism, right? Okay. So Fordism, if we recall from earlier in the course, right? Henry Ford created the assembly line in 1914, right? Very famously, it's like the factory system, but set up on a more rational basis. So instead of the workers moving and taking their tools to different parts of the factories to complete different tasks, right? The automobile actually comes to them, and they just stand still and do their job all the time. And it sped up mass manufacturing, right? And eventually everybody sort of copied it. One of the things about Fordism, right, this kind of the system that Ford creates, is it's also highly bureaucratic, right? Because basically you split things down into even smaller tasks in a Fordist kind of assembly line, and you needed a ton of managers to kind of oversee all of that and make sure it was all working. And the idea with it was like, the managers were the only ones who could see the whole process, right? Workers would just see the same task over and over again, right? They would weld that door joint over and over, or attach that quarter panel onto the car over and over again, but they would never really see the whole finished product. So you needed a really powerful management system that saw the whole process to make sure that things were working. And yeah, this becomes the norm, through the world wars. Especially during and after the Second World War, we see a wide range of industrial sectors adopt, assembly lines and Fordist practices. And a lot of them end up, what happens post-World War II? Lots of people come back from obviously serving in the military, and they bring sort of military mindsets to that assembly line process, right? So they start to organize them by ranks, right? And treat bureaucracies like these military sort of structures. And so you get, things like very strong hierarchies, loyalty being stressed. You get things like corporate loyalty, and this is the kind of era where you get, the idea of the company man as a sort of key idea. Company man, someone who stays in a job, for their whole life, where your loyalty is to that bureaucracy and that corporation. That becomes really entrenched after the Second World War. And then strong systems of discipline and really job classification, almost like military ranks. Okay. So, as we've gotten into kind of the 21st century, right, this question, or this Fordist model, is one that a lot of kind of management experts and social researchers have started to question. One of these is Robert Reich, who wrote this book, right, The Work of Nations. And he said that this kind of model, right, the giant corporation that you set up on Fordist models is really, really outmoded, right, because it lacks that flexibility to deal with global conditions. And we see this, right, especially I think in the tech sector, we constantly see like big companies sort of having to buy small companies. That's become really common because they're unable to sort of deal with how fast things are changing, and instead of actually sort of figuring it out, they just buy a smaller competitor that doesn't have this big Fordist bureaucracy. Oh, what's the one I'm thinking of? Is there two L's? I think it's Qualcomm with two M's. I can't remember Qualcomm. I can't remember how it's spelled, but Qualcomm makes chips, right? And particularly they make chips that are called Snapdragon. They are, ARM-based chips. And one of the things that happened to Qualcomm is that their chips were falling behind Apple's, right? They weren't able to design a chip with ARM architecture that was as fast as the or is it the M series? Yeah, the M series from Apple. So what did they do? Right, they went and bought an Israeli company, or is it an Israeli? I think it's an Israeli company called Nuvia, right, that was designing these chips. And basically, that company was small. It was a few dozen people working on these designs, but it was really innovative. So they just bought it, right, because their big, super corporatized form at Qualcomm wasn't actually able to develop these chips. So you're gonna, we've already started to see ARM-based chips in Windows-based laptops, and it's all out of this process that happened. Okay. Oh, I'm out of time. Can I do these last 2 points? Other forms were, yeah, so we've seen other sources, right? Outsourcing, franchises, joint ventures, strategic alliances, buyouts are big. But yeah, in the big companies, like Microsoft, Qualcomm, Google, those big bureaucracies remain embedded even when they do these other forms of management. Okay, we'll pick up on this one hey, it's Friday. On Monday. We'll see you on Monday. Have a great weekend. Oh, all right. We'll see you on Monday. Try to have less tech problems on Monday.